back to Reporters Roundtable. I'm Denise Rollard-Barnes. Today we're talking about the wall between church and state and some of the cases that challenge its separation. Jamil, let's go back to you.
I've always wanted to know, it seems like every time a minister puts his foot in his mouth, and they do that, you know, we always hear about, you know, you may violate the IRS tax law and, you know, the IRS is coming after you. But I have yet to see when, if, and where that these people are ever prosecuted. Can you give me any statistics about, does the IRS actually go after preachers? And I've never seen anybody going to jail in all these years.
Well, no, nobody goes to jail, but some people lose their tax exemptions, and in some cases they have to respond to their constituents, their donors, and say, oh, we violated the law, we have to alert you to this. And even, I suspect, a mutual friend of ours, the Reverend Floyd Flake up in New York, a big church there, had a visit from the IRS when he had endorsed Al Gore over Bill Bradley in that primary 2 election cycles ago. So they do it does have teeth. Most pastors do not want to endorse candidates because they know it just tears the churches apart.
But how does that get to the IRS?
Well, somebody has to complain about it, and we frequently do complain about it. Yeah, because, you know, it all goes central, but it all goes back historically. If we can just get off the current moment. John Kennedy, when he was running for the presidency, he went down to a bunch of Baptist ministers down in the state of Texas, and he said, I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute. That's the principle. We should be working as much as we can to keep a decent distance between church and state because it will help the health of the church, and it also won't mean government has to make religious decisions. It can barely make any other decisions.
Barry thinks he knows what's good for the church. Let's let the churches decide that for themselves.
In the church, as a matter of fact.
I know that's true, but every church has its own authority structure, and they can make decisions as a community for themselves, what is healthy and what is not healthy for them. And let's point something out here. First of all, you're talking about the IRS code, which is up for interpretation, even within the IRS itself. So a lot of times your letters, when you send them out, are quite intimidating to pastors, making them think, in fact, as Emil said, that they're going to go to jail. They're not going to go to jail. They just might lose their tax exemption status.
You send letters to ministers to say,
this year we sent out 100,000 letters to church and lay leaders just saying you ought to obey the law, you ought to find out from your own legal counsel what the law is and make sure that you're not going to violate it. And people call it intimidating. I just call it good education. I think it's very responsible, and it's exactly what people who want to obey the law ought to want to see.
Some people think it's a double standard because it's like when Jeremiah Wright had his comments, it seemed like everybody was saying Jeremiah Wright should have done this, Barack had his appointment, I don't know this man. I mean, everybody went after Wright. But then there says sometimes you see other ministers can say things in other communities and just go ballistic, call Obama a terrorist and everything else, and nothing seems to happen. Does it often, I mean, so is there a double standard going on here when it comes down to your 100,000 letters or what?
Not to us, because we, up until this election cycle, when there tend to be more complaints that we were filing against people who have endorsed McCain just because of the volume of this campaign. But the truth is, we have always, up to now, it was literally a 50-50 split. We complain, and we did complain about a church, for example, in Nevada, where they endorsed Barack Obama 3 days before the primary.
Here's, I think, the question for you, Barry. Why should a certain segment of the population, meaning religious people who meet weekly for worship, have restraints on them that no one else in America has? In other words,
well, that's not true.
why should, well, let's just broaden it. Let's say nonprofits in general. Yeah. Why should those engaged in the work of nonprofits, Acorn, for example, let's take that group. Why should there be a rule that stifles their speech and their expression and not other groups in the country?
Very simple,
it's unfair. It's just simply unfair. It says if you are religious or you engage in the business of nonprofit, if you're a corporation, say anything you want. If you're a big fat cat international corporation, you can say what you want. If you're a newspaper, you can endorse whoever you want. If you're a newspaper enterprise and make a lot of money at that and have a lot of readers, but not if you're religious. What's the matter with that?
If you're a not-for-profit organization, you get this huge break. You don't have to pay taxes. Other people do. Corporations, by the way, do not endorse candidates. It's illegal. You should know that.
But isn't it true? That's why a lot of people didn't. But isn't it true? That's why a lot of people were scared or reluctant to do Bush's faith-based initiative because of this very rule.
Well, they were reluctant to do it because they knew that in the faith-based program, the idea of giving money to a church to do the work that it was doing with its own dollars before, it might strangle the vitality of those religious ministries if you got money from the government. It always does.
Religious organizations, you know better. Come on.
Most don't want to take it.
Many churches allow candidates to come into the church to present their case, whether the minister endorses or not. And some may view it as a kind of endorsement by allowing folks to come in to present to the congregation. Sure. What are you saying about that?
I'd say as long as you invite both sides or all the candidates that are running.
Once you open the door,
you open the door,
because that's what. Do you have to put forth the effort to do that, or
well, yeah, you have to. If you want to issue a request for one candidate to come, you issue them to both. It doesn't mean both are going to come, and if they both don't come, that's not the church's problem. But it is the inclusivity that is what makes the church a part of the community that helps democracy work. It's not the pastor endorsing a candidate, it's allowing all the candidates to speak their truth to a congregation that's going to have to decide on its own.
Religion is by its very nature exclusive. You are an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. It belongs to Christ. That's an exclusive claim. Religion is by nature exclusive. And talk about violation of separation of church and state here, Barry. You're suggesting that the IRS dictate to churches what they will allow said in their pulpits and what they won't. That's a flagrant violation.
Add one other note about education, about religion in schools, because church and state also would include public education facilities. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, it's very important. It's still, we thought it was resolved back in the early 1960s and early 70s when the Supreme Court said no government-written or government-promoted prayer in schools. But now we find groups all over the country trying to evade that very clear rule. We're having coaches who make some kids feel inferior by praying only Christian prayers. And if you're a Muslim student, for example, it's just tough. One guy recently said to somebody, go to the bathroom if you don't want to listen to the Christian prayer. See, that should not be happening in a country with 2,000 different religions.
We need rules against rude people, not against religion.
No, if you're a rude religious person, then you got to answer to two.
It's going to be interesting to see if Obama does win, though. How would he shape his faith in terms of the White House? Because you have the prayer service, the National Day of Prayer, and you're wondering, like when Bush was in office, that he welcomed the faith community. When Obama gets in, you kind of wonder, and how will that be? Or if McCain gets in, will he embrace the faith community, or he keep him at arm's distance?
Any president knows that religion is a wonderful support to society, to any government administration. Our founders understood that. If you look at the role of the Salvation Army, if you look at Catholic Charities, if you look at all the great work being done by urban churches, there is no more generous, more philanthropic, more positive contribution to a society. And I would hope any president would understand the vigorous role of religion in the society.
I'm sure you go to the movies. Clint Eastwood, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The sad truth is that there is good, and there is bad, and there is ugly in the way in which religion has been misused. The same folks, or the opposite of the folks who were saying that Martin Luther King, right on with that support of civil rights, there were churches saying, wait a minute, the book of Genesis says God separated the light from the darkness. That means segregation forever. So it can be misused in all kinds of ways as well.
I want to thank you.
Thank you
for joining us. Up next, an expert who assists lawmakers in legislative issues dealing with the separation of church and state. Reporters Roundtable will be right back with more on Pulpit Politics after this.